So,
sorry, Zen, you have some issues with your microphone. It's difficult to hear.
oh, really? I might change my...
It works now.
Yeah, it works now.
So, is it okay or not?
Yeah, it's okay.
It's okay right now.
It's okay.
Okay, cool. So, welcome everyone to the first ever SIG On-Prem meeting. So, I'm not sure if we need some introduction to what the SIG is supposed to do, but maybe it's worth mentioning. So, we want to cover all things related to running Kubernetes on bare metal, on-premise, essentially outside of the cloud providers. So maybe let me share the screen with the agenda, and we will try to go through the agenda. Yeah. So first thing on the agenda is actually the time for the meetings. So I'm not sure if this time is optimal. I'm not sure where you guys are from. Maybe some people are from different time zones. Also, there is a request from SIG OpenStack to not overlap with them. They have meetings on Wednesdays, a little bit later, but it would be good if we kind of if we share the bi-weekly schedule. So next meeting would be whether next week or in 3 weeks, probably in 3 weeks. So any comments on the time of the meeting, guys? What would you prefer, later or earlier? I don't expect earlier.
Looks perfect.
This time looks perfect,
Yes.
right? Okay, I think what we'll do, I will try to send this doodle survey, and we'll see what is the response. And I think that we have it covered. All right, next item is actually probably most important item in today's meeting, and maybe Joseph Jacks, you would like to drive this discussion about what we actually want to cover in the SIG and what we definitely not want to cover.
Yeah, sure. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. So hey folks, this is pretty exciting. It's a new SIG, as Zen was mentioning, and pretty interested in the feedback from the community. I think we got a lot of positive reception from the initial message that went out on the mailing list from a variety of companies looking at a lot of the drivers for this new SIG and expressing their interest. So yeah, maybe we can just have an open discussion generally around what everyone would like to see in this SIG regarding on-premise efforts and deployments of Kubernetes, particularly behind the firewall and private data centers, not on a public cloud provider. I think that's very broad. So we've had some exchanges in the Google group about what would be in scope, what would be out of scope. Maybe ensuring that we don't have too much overlap with a variety of other SIGs that have narrow focus areas with specific frameworks like OpenStack or SIG cluster ops and other SIGs. It would be worthwhile outlining a few things that we could really focus on and start to develop some work items out of, so that we can be productive with the time spent here. I mean, I have a few ideas and opinions here, but maybe I'll just open it up to anyone who's on the call, anyone who's on this meeting, to kind of share what what you think would be the most kind of crucial things for us to focus on in this SIG regarding Kubernetes and on-premise deployments. So it looks like we have an in and out kind of bullets in the meeting notes here. Yeah, if anyone has anything that you think might not be useful to cover or would be out of scope, it looks like Zen is mentioning kind of out of scope would be, talking about OpenStack deployments, which makes a lot of sense since we already have an OpenStack SIG. Any other ideas from anyone as far as what could be potentially out of scope or in scope for this SIG?
Hey, this is Justin Garrison. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest pain points for on-prem stuff is just getting started and getting things up and running. It's hard because everyone's on-prem environment looks different. And so we shouldn't try to define like one way that can set everything up, because we're never going to get a consensus on an base operating system and network layout and topology and everything. So we should have some best practices, and I think things like kubeadmin help with that, where it kind of obscures away some of the details of like, well, as long as you have layer 2 connectivity, like you should be fine. And it doesn't matter the base OS as much. Some of that stuff I think is a better focus for us. And especially in things that, like you were saying, don't overlap with other areas, where it's like, if it's cluster lifecycle, like make sure we go to that SIG for like, hey, how do I do upgrades? It's like, well, that's, we have a group that's dedicated to focusing on that pain point.
Right. Yeah. I think this is, that's really well put, Justin. I agree with everything you just said. I think one of the initial things people will start confronting themselves with when they look at this SIG, like if we care about the success of this SIG and making sure that it actually lasts and is useful to a lot of people in the community, probably the first thing that we should focus on, which is the first main item on this agenda, is what's in and out of scope, but maybe outlining for directional purposes, like where people should be going in terms of the focus area, the core focus areas of the other SIGs. And we don't want to be too presumptuous about what all the focus areas are for, say, cluster ops, cluster lifecycle, and OpenStack SIGs. But maybe it makes sense to just confirm where the most overlap is with other SIGs, and then meet with the leaders or the leads of those other SIGs and kind of get 3 or 4 points from all those other SIGs around. This is where you should be going for these specific things that are likely to not be discussed or worked on in SIG On-Prem, so that people know exactly where to go. Because I think one of the things that could happen out of this is just a lot of splintering and fragmentation happening. And I think the last thing that we all want is a confusion resulting out of like people not knowing what the SIGs are really for. So, I'm happy to take the action on that. Maybe Zen, you and I can do this. We can connect with the other, like the leads of these other SIGs that we feel where the most overlap is. And then we can kind of collect 3 or 4 bullets on what the biggest focus areas are for those other SIGs. And then like have that in our charter or a mandate as a preface to say, for people interested in these specific areas, you should go to these other SIGs. But for SIG On-Prem, we're going to be focusing on, other core things related to running Kubernetes on premise. And then we should define what those things are, obviously. That's how I would go about this.
And I think one other thing that is really good for this SIG specifically is pointing out some of the features you get or don't get running Kubernetes on-prem, where you don't get a load balancer and you don't get some of those things that you'll have to do yourself, and have the documentation on how to do some of that stuff, whether it's, auto provisioners for storage or whatever the options are. But yeah, we need a clear, like if you're running on-prem, like this is what you should expect out of your cluster. Like you shouldn't expect load balancers to work out of the box, and you shouldn't expect some of these other things.
Right. So sort of like gotchas and maybe some of the gaps that aren't as obvious as running on a public cloud provider.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, this is Spencer. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Cool. Hey. I was thinking another thing I'd like to see a little bit around, I know we can't plan too much about network layout and things like that, but I'd like to see some, us develop some documents around just at a high level, like what makes sense for hardware and planning and that kind of thing, right? So what's a production grade Kubernetes cluster look like? How many API servers should you anticipate having in etcd nodes and things like that? And providing some of that as input for, I guess, people planning to go on-prem.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think there's some overlap with maybe the broader, like, how do we define what does production mean and what does a production reference architecture look like? That sort of is a cross-cutting thing across many different SIGs, but specific to bare metal and like private cloud stuff, I think People do ask that question a lot. I couldn't agree more, Spencer. That would be a really useful thing to have, particularly around like what does the capacity management and like the node count kind of planning look like when you have a static environment that you can't sort of auto scale as dynamically as you can through an API and a public cloud on a very short term kind of basis.
Nice.
I think instead of also defining some of that stuff ourselves, we should, as much as possible, link out to the documentation for those projects where it's like, if it's etcd, like they have a bunch of documentation on this is a high available etcd cluster. These are ways you can set it up, and we shouldn't be defining that ourselves, but say like, hey, this is a step you're going to need. Go to this documentation, and they have ways of running it within containers or running it through the etcd operator or on separate nodes, however it be. I think we should link out to that as much as possible instead of trying to define and curate that ourselves.
I agree. That makes sense. Any other areas that you think are like out of scope? We started to talk a lot about what's in scope here.
So I have a question about scope in general, I guess, is if this is on-prem, and we interchange on-prem and bare metal quite a bit, but when we mean on-prem, are we also including things like, I don't know, VMware and potentially other virtualization platforms like Zen and stuff as on-premise, not quite bare metal?
Yeah, I think that's a discussion worth having for sure. That's a really good question. Like, I think that came up during the initial exchanges. So I think it's a really important thing to clarify. My view, and this is Joseph, my view is it covers both virtualization and bare metal nodes. So hypervisor agnostic, and then just any physical machine that doesn't have a hypervisor and just has an OS. That sort of falls into the on-prem category. Lots of people just run, Kubernetes on a bare metal node with an operating system. Many people do the same, but with a hypervisor, and it's sort of managed physical infrastructure. And I think that broadly falls into the on-premise category. I'd love to hear what other people think about that. That's just my take.
Yeah, so my point of view, we already have OpenStack excluded here. I think the main reason is that we have a SIG OpenStack. And for VMware, I remember there's a proposal already. There was not too much of a feedback, but it might be created at some stage. Another story is, I think just recently eBay released their Kubernetes story, and they're using OpenStack as a underneath hardware management platform just because it's mature there. So they don't want to deal with that inside of Kubernetes. So, well, I think we need to see how it goes really, because I'm not sure if we should cover VMware or like virtualization platforms in general. It might be a good idea initially, because I guess lots of people have some feedback and experience already. At some stage, we might just, give it away to some other SIG if it's created. But yeah, I'm fine to start with that.
Yeah, I mean, I could see there being value in, providing some getting started guides around, okay, well, you want to run on-prem, if you want to do OpenStack, here's pointers to the OpenStack stuff, here's pointers to the VMware stuff, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I think talking about private cloud at a high level is fine. Going in and supporting OpenStack as part of this SIG is probably not fine, right?
Yeah, the one concern I have around the virtualization stuff is like it could splinter out. Like I'd hate to see subsections or sub SIGs around virtualization providers, like we're starting to see with cloud providers. So the broad trend over the last maybe 6 months is like, we have SIGs for the specific infrastructure providers. So I'm not sure if there's SIG AWS, but there's SIG OpenStack. So the major cloud providers have sort of dedicated SIGs. If we start to get into the domain of, well, Kubernetes is also pretty unique on a virtualization provider basis. Like there might be a SIG Zen or SIG KVM or SIG vSphere or SIG VMware or something, which I think is a bad idea. So, but then that also kind of makes one think about if we exclude the virtualization users in SIG On-Prem, does that limit our sort of audience and participation base? Like, are we only solving Kubernetes on a physical machine with an OS kind of users? So yeah, maybe we just wait to see how that evolves.
And yeah, in my opinion, I think that encompassing the on-prem or whatever virtualization environment isn't already provided in a SIG, because there is a SIG AWS and SIG OpenStack, and I think it can be encompassed in this SIG for, hey, we have some pointers for a VMware setup. Maybe we're not like fully running with it and defining everything and like startup scripts and everything like that. But if there's enough interest and then it wants to splinter out into a different SIG, then we can hand off all that and say, okay, there was enough interest in, people running in Zen. So now there's a SIG Zen, and we just point to that. And I mean, in my opinion, ideally we would get down to the point where like SIG on-prem like could be more narrowly focused to just SIG bare metal, and then there would be a SIG VMware and a SIG Zen, and we don't have to worry about that documentation, or if that's where we want to be, like we go to that documentation. Because when someone comes in and says, "I want to run Kubernetes," and I have Rev or something, like I have some other thing that's not covered by one of these startup scripts, like how do I go about automating that? And unless they're experts in their virtualization technology, like they're gonna have to find a special interest group that already has that documentation or has guides on setting it up there. And we can obviously be very generic with something like, again, kubadmin, where it's just, you run a couple commands and they link together through some overlay and it looks like magic to most people. So, I mean, that's good where we can have a more generic approach, and even things like Kubernetes, the hard way, where it's like, here's the very basics of what you would need to get your cluster up. And as more and more things, if there is more focus around one area, if someone wants to drive it, that they can go off and do their own thing to, narrowly focus on VMware or a different virtualizer.
Yep, that makes sense. Did we talk about upgrades and where that would fall into place here? So it sounds like I see upgrades in general as out of scope. Is that something we should just acknowledge, just sort of exclusively lives in SIG cluster ops or SIG cluster lifecycle?
Yeah, I think we should be careful here because it's already covered, for example, by kubeapp, right? This is the goal for kubeapp to support. So maybe we should more concentrate on some specific cases. But to be honest, I don't see any specific cases for bare metal upgrades. Maybe now, but maybe some other people see that. So I don't know what are your thoughts, guys, about the upgrades? I mean, if we want to take care about upgrades, I think we should have it more detailed here. Like, any feedback on upgrades?
So, it's sort of tied to the design of the cluster, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And the upgrade story is changing, where if you're running self-hosted, you do it one way. If you're running kubeadmin, you run it a different way. Are you reprovisioning nodes for upgrades, or are you doing it in place? I think that's a cluster lifecycle thing, at least for now, because that story keeps changing release after release. And even the 1.5 to 1.6 is already going to have like downtime migration upgrades for etcd3. So there's a lot of things there that I don't think we should focus on.
Also feels like SIG cluster lifecycle is basically SIG upgrade sometimes, right? Like that's the whole, it's almost like it's an entire SIG dedicated just to that currently.
I agree, yeah, because there's other SIGs that help you get it installed, and then once, day 2 is you need to do an upgrade because Kubernetes releases every other day.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it sounds like upgrades should be out of scope for this. Cool.
So there's another thing added. I don't know who added it, but I remember this from the initial conversations. So this specific item is improving end-to-end test support on-premise, but I think it should be a little bit more general, like closing the gaps that we identify for the on-premise installations. But maybe let's talk about the end-to-end test. I think it's a very interesting case, and we're in Mirantis. We're also already working on it. So can you speak up, whoever put it on the meeting minutes?
Yeah, this is Brenton from Red Hat, and we've just hit problems. I don't know who added it to the initial announcement because it could have been someone else from Red Hat. It's just something that we care about. If there's anything we can do to make it easier for developers to run the end-to-end test against bare metal, I think it would be good.
I know there's been discussions about the CNCF community cluster being used for those purposes. I'm not sure who was leading that or where the last thread was, but that's a pretty large bare metal environment that can be used for evaluating some of the gaps or some of the things we want to improve in end-to-end tests for on-prem stuff.
Hello, this is Derek from Checkout. So do you want to consider local storage for SIG bare metal or SIG on-prem? Because we hit a lot of problems with local storage. I know there is a SIG storage for this problem, but I think local storage is one of the things that we really want in this on-prem scenario.
Yeah, I think that's definitely going to fall into scope here. We have to be super careful because that's where the cross-cutting dynamics start to come in. Is like there's dedicated SIGs for so many of the infrastructure primitives like networking and compute and instrumentation and so on. And a lot of those complexities haven't really been surfaced in the context of bare metal. So maybe we could talk about some of the challenges and develop efforts to make people more comfortable with supported best practices and patterns and so on around those areas, but point people back to the SIGs that are for those specific things, broadly speaking, across all the infrastructure providers. I think that's going to be an interesting balancing act with this. Much of it is probably the same though, with like the cloud provider specific SIGs like SIG AWS or SIG Open. That's kind of how I see. I totally agree though. So mounting and the life cycle of persistent volumes and persistent storage devices behind the firewall is a much different story than public cloud providers.
So is anyone here who's also attending SIG storage and could tell us what's the current situation? I wasn't there for some time. So are those guys more concentrating on storage in general, or is it more from the Kubernetes side? Because I still think that there is a part of storage story that we could take care of, like how to optimally deploy, say, your Ceph cluster or some other cluster. So anyone aware of what SIG storage is doing in this area?
I've been attending several meetings of SIG storage, and I'm more focused on storage story. Have more like from Kubernetes perspective, not like from the storage perspective. If I have answered your question, if I understood you correctly.
Yeah. I'm just That's probably We should check it out. That's another area, kind of gray area, where we should talk to other SIGs and define the boundaries. So.
Yeah, so like in general, the like main goal seems like how does Kubernetes work with storage, not like how storage works with Kubernetes.
All right, so there might be some part of the story that will be worth looking at, probably from our perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So let's keep it at the question mark part still. Yeah. So what about networking? I think it's very similar, but networking on premise is much different than networking on cloud providers. So what do you guys think about networking?
It's a must-have story for this SIG.
I agree.
Because like networking stores are absolutely different from multiple providers, and as far as I know, no SIGs, even SIG networking doesn't cover at all. Like globally, they doesn't cover globally. There that allows you to deploy Kubernetes on bare metal with everything working from the networking side.
By networking, you mean external load balancer for bare metal? Because this is the only problem with networking on bare metal. Everything else runs similar to the cloud providers.
I would disagree with that a little bit. I mean, I think with providing another like extension control plane on top of the base layer 2 networking in Kubernetes requires tools to be configured and deployed specific to on-premise physical networks that are pretty orthogonal to some of the default like out of the box services you get on a public cloud, like VPCs and dynamic IP allocations and so on. So, but I think more of the gap is around the load balancing piece. Whether you're talking about like connection layer 5 or layer 7 load balancing, a lot of those things can kind of vary. I think it goes back to the SIG storage one, is like where does the activity overlap with SIG networking? I haven't really been too informed recently around what SIG networking is doing, so maybe we could connect with them and figure out where things overlap as well.
Yeah, I think there's plenty to discuss there.
Yeah.
Is there any interest in talking about out-of-band management sort of things, like potential like Redfish API build-in into the Kubernetes core or IPMI stuff? Or is this are folks more interested in operational side of that, or maybe folks aren't interested in that at all?
I thought about that a little bit, and I think that's not directly Kubernetes related. I do think there's some benefit in having controllers or something that exposes some of that and adds details, either labels about a node or some way to start and stop nodes through a controller. But I think that's a lot of it is fairly hardware dependent, and especially if we're taking on some other running in VMware, it's a different story of how you actually get like a console to something or turn on and off something, because you're going through, I mean, granted, a lot of newer hardware has APIs to do remote turn on and off of systems, but that still requires a lot of initial setup that I think would just be too much details and too much noise for what the SIG should focus on.
Sure.
I don't know. I'm a little indifferent about that. I think Dalton makes a really good point. Like that's certainly something that comes up. It's maybe solution or tool specific too, because there's a bunch of different systems that have their own opinions around how you create the spark of life on the machine and interface with the like the lights out management stuff. So I don't know.
Well, and I do think we can curate some of that information in, if you're deploying your cluster, bare metal, and you're using, say, Tectonic, here's how you can interface with, boot config or their API to actually like start the machine and provision it with out-of-band management or, some other means to get BIOS information and that kind of stuff. I think there is benefit in that, in curating some of that, but not necessarily providing the details and how-tos ourselves.
Yeah, that's why it may be actually just specific to my particular interests. But in particular about Redfish, I'm kind of wondering if Kubernetes may someday actually speak to Redfish APIs directly. But just something we've been kind of thinking about. I don't know if other people care. But just, potentially to label nodes in particular ways.
So there's already some work going on around CPU features and automatic labeling of the nodes. So I think there's a place for this story as well. And we are also interested in that. We had some stories when we were working on the cluster upgrades. We were thinking about the node maintenance, this kind of stuff, and also fencing. So fencing is directly related to out-of-band management and similar stuff. So maybe this is something we could also start working on. But I think we can start small, as someone suggested, just point to some existing pieces of software or documentation, and then we can expand from that once we have some time and resources. But yeah, the thing is that no other SIG will cover that, right? Definitely. This is not in the scope of any other SIG. So maybe that's just, we need to do this.
Can we go back for a moment to the end-to-end tests? Because what did you mean by end-to-end test improvements? It means increasing test coverage, enabling test on bare metal, or simplifying the way we are running those tests?
So in the past, it was a big problem, right? It's not that bad now. There's not so many tests that are failing like by default on-prem. So I think this is actually a very important area for me. I think our focus should be to ensure that most tests are actually passing on-premise. The next thing is for me extending the tests so we have dedicated tests for on-premise when we have cases for this, obviously. And probably also some kind of extending the CI. So we have more on-prem tests running through the CI and taking care of those tests. We'll probably need some duty, this kind of stuff.
Okay, I asked because there is some work started about improving end-to-end Go, and I will put the link to the notes, because it's still a proposal, and if you want to add some changes, it would be the best if you start discussing it there.
That's in a SIG testing or?
Yeah. It's a person. It started by a person from SIG testing.
Yeah, we can combine resources definitely for this one.
So maybe just to get to all the agenda items, we can close out on sort of in and out of scope. I think we have a fair bit here, and we can always revisit this a little bit in the next meeting as well. But we have sort of what's the working cadence from various participants. Maybe that's a little bit redundant. I think we've gotten a lot of interest in this SIG. There's probably a good 20, 30 people in the meeting. So I think we'll organically get a lot of support and collaboration on that basis.
Yeah, 36 people, which is a really good achievement, I guess.
It's quite the big SIG.
Yeah.
For the beginning.
Yeah. We'll see how it goes. Yeah. So do we really want? I don't know if it's a good idea to go around like with 36 people. It will probably hard. Joseph, what do you think?
Then something wrong with your microphone.
Again, is it better now?
Better now.
Yes, better.
Okay. So Joseph, we have 36 people. I'm not sure if we can go around and ask.
I think we should just strike this one out, actually. I think we'll organically get a lot of support for various things that pop up. So we can just delete this one or just strike it out.
Mm-hmm.
There's a document that I'm not sure if I created or you did, Zen, but there's sort of a variety of efforts out there. Open source projects, I think, is the thing we should focus on here, for kind of simplifying the deployment and the management of running Kubernetes on bare metal. I think it's just awesome to see that there's so many efforts. Like having a place for people to go and look at the various systems that are out there would be useful. So if everyone in the meeting here could just go to that doc and add projects that may be missing, or add some color to the descriptions would be great. I'm sure there's more than that are listed there. I think there's only 9 that are listed. There's probably 20 plus. I wouldn't be surprised if there are 20 plus systems out there in the community that exist.
Yeah, I think it's pretty crucial to actually collect all those projects, because that would be probably starting point for any sort of documentation we'll be trying to deliver. So yeah, I also would encourage everyone to take a look at this list. And
I only have comment access on the document. Oh, well, maybe it's a.
I just changed the access, so anyone should be able to comment now. You can't just refresh the doc. I just realized I owned it.
Awesome.
Yeah, there's also in the same document. There's this second tab with the current Kubernetes features that are in progress or that are present, touching only on-premise stuff. So it's not very extensive. So if you guys know about any PRs, any staff proposals concentrated on on-premise, it would be nice to put it here. I think the next step would be to try to identify if we can somehow commit to that as a SIG and have some work that we track inside of the SIG, which would be really cool. So we will have some definitely from the Mirantis side here, but for the other guys, it would be also good to add more stuff. All right, let's see what else we have. So Joseph, do we want to do anything more on this?
No, I think that's it. That's all I wanted to say. Just point people to that doc, and if there's anything missing, just go ahead and add to it.
I did get write permissions on it, but I actually lost write permissions on the meeting notes doc. I can now view only. It actually kicked me out of it.
Oh yeah, I think I made a mistake. I was editing the wrong one. So just refresh.
Okay.
Yeah, you should be good. Anyone should be able to edit both docs, edit and see both docs. Yeah, so the next item here, begin process of organizing best practices. I think best practices is going to be something that we spend a fair amount of time on in in this SIG. So I mean, it's great to see Justin from Disney on this as an end user and pretty active in the community. Do you have any thoughts around this, Justin, from like a best practices standpoint, what you'd like to see, or others that are users?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, use cases are always a little different on bare metal. So I am curious. I mean, just going through some of the projects, even that spreadsheet was interesting for me to see because I didn't know some of them that existed, and some of them I'm not sure if they're actually in scope for this. Like I don't know if KOps can do bare metal. I know it does in Amazon, and they're working on Google, but I don't think it works bare metal.
I think it's on their agenda for some time, so it's not there yet. I think.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe we can just qualify that without upsetting anyone. Just qualify that in the description instead of deleting it. Anyone else?
Yeah, I don't really know how we handle that. I've had some concerns about it as well because I think technically Bash scripting works on, is a thing that runs on any host, right? And is that bare metal support? Does that have the things that we need? It might be good to define some like minimal expectations for what we want our tools to actually be able to do.
I think it'd be useful if perhaps we were to say like who's actually using this in production and is actively participating versus.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I found this cool thing on GitHub.
Yeah, I've seen dozens of GitHub repos of Ansible scripts and Puppet and Chef and Sol and all these things. That was like, hey, I did this one time. It supports this one version of this one OS with this one version of Kubernetes, and I don't think that's the way to provide these links. Even I've been working with another friend that's been setting up a bare metal cluster and following the Kubernetes documentation for one built on CentOS. And the CentOS one was really out of date. It was only deploying Kubernetes 1.3, and it didn't provide a proxy or a DNS server or any. I was like, wow, this is really terrible documentation. So it's like I submitted a PR to delete the page because it's like, this is really out of date, and I don't think we should have people find these pages that aren't supported, aren't maintained, and it's just a one-off like, hey, I did it this one way, everyone look at it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree with what Dalton was saying as well around expectations for like what should fit and be acceptable so that people get referred to quality tools and examples.
Yeah.
So should probably put that in the notes there. Sets on there.
Yeah, so what about the, I don't know if it was there already, what about the reference architecture? I know it was mentioned during the mailing threads. So do you guys think it's even possible to define some reference architecture that we could suggest to the users in documentation, or is it like too wide of an area to even try?
It depends what we mean by reference architecture. Cluster Ops spent a lot of time on this one, and maybe if we time boxed it or something, or were specific about what we wanted. Are you referring to like an architecture or a blessed set of hardware all the way up to?
No. I was thinking more about the Kubernetes architecture. The question is because I'm mainly running on bare metal, so I'm not really aware how people deploy it on AWS or other providers. So is there anything specific about bare metal in terms of architecture, or is it just very common for different environments?
I think the cluster ops group did a decent job making the reference architecture generic enough so that whether you're running on bare metal or VMs or, it's just, for a high available cluster, you want, 3 masters behind a load balancer. What that load balancer is, we don't really care, but it should, reroute 6443 or whatever port to get to the master. And for, your ingress controller or your service load balancer, whatever those may be, the reference architecture, I think, is generic enough last I looked at it to make sense on-prem. Doesn't matter if you're in VMware or bare metal, as long as they connect and data path goes through these systems.
All right. So again, this is something that we can just help extend in terms of bare metal, or give some advices.
Yeah, and point to the SIGs that are focusing on those areas where we can, collect that information, kind of aggregate it. When someone comes in and says, I want to run Kubernetes on bare metal, like, okay, well, look at this diagram first. Like, we don't, necessarily maintain that, but this SIG is doing all the work there. And then when you want to come back and do an install, here's some tools that you can do that install. When you want to do an upgrade, go over to the lifecycle group and they'll help you do the upgrade, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So should we proceed to the last item?
Yeah, I just did a strike through on the second to the last one, which is kind of redundant.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So Ihor, this is a request from you, actually from the project management group. So can you provide some details here?
Regarding 2017 roadmap, right?
Yeah.
Yes, so we are expecting to have some defined, like at least drafted roadmap for 2017 from every SIG and from your SIG as well. So I would like to see your goals for 2017, like you're expecting some projects to be implemented in scope of Kubernetes and so on. So if you can take a look at like different roadmaps from multiple SIGs, for example, SIG CLI has presented their roadmap in the last Kubernetes community call, so you may prepare a similar one. It would be great if you'll prepare some kind of roadmap if you have any for 1.6. If you don't have any exact plans for 1.6, you may start working on whole 2017 roadmap for the other releases.
So I have a question for you on this, Ihor. Yes. This is interesting. This is Joseph again. So is there a correlation to, in your request here, to SIGs actually contributing code to upstream Kubernetes relative to project planning, or can things be orthogonal to actually contributing code?
Well, first of all, it's like contributing code, but it's not limited to contributing code only. It's more like running some processes, like developing some stuff and so on. So, for example, we have discussed this question with SIGs that are driving some cloud providers, like SIG AWS, SIG OpenStack, like not established SIG Azure people. So the main request, the main goal for them was not preparing some code base, but for example, preparing some reference architecture. I suppose like from SIG on-premises, you can also provide your vision of the reference architecture, like how ideal Kubernetes clusters on bare metal should look like, and so on, like something similar.
Got it.
Yeah, so I think we're too young to commit anything in terms of code in upstream Kubernetes, right? But yeah, we'll probably try to discuss it based on those meeting minutes, what we could kind of provide as our input or our contribution into 1.6. So what is the deadline for that?
Well, the deadline for committing new features is January 24. You should also remember that this release is kind of stabilization release, so no crucial new features will be accepted here. But if you have some stuff that can be clarified as really stabilization, so feel free to submit it.
Okay, cool. We'll work on this. So we did all of the stuff from the agenda. I'm surprised. So is it time for Q&A?
One last thing that I was trying to add to the agenda, and I can't edit it still, but curious if we want to at all cover or at least link out to other like projects that are based on Kubernetes that run on-prem, things like OpenStack or OpenShift, or I know there's more and more that are becoming like that. I don't know if that's in scope or not, but I know there's people that may work their way into this SIG running those sort of environments. But for default for me, I just want to say, like, at first I'm thinking no, because whatever community is running that, if it's OpenShift or whatever it is, they should have support from a different community. But I think we should acknowledge some of those projects that people are running that are running on-prem that aren't necessarily, they're Kubernetes based. You can use some of the Kubernetes tools, but it's probably a different area to get support. Does everyone else agree with that, or am I?
I'm not that entirely against, to be honest. This will be kind of an area where we'll have kind of clash of interests from different vendors, right? So we probably don't want to make the SIG kind of place where vendors will be arguing what's better. But as you said, yeah, we definitely should acknowledge, and also I think for Kubernetes itself, it's good to show that there are interesting projects out there running on top of Kubernetes, making them even more interesting. Well, for me, it's an open question. I don't know what other folks are thinking about it.
I'm not opposed to it either. I think it falls into the category of listing projects and just classifying what kinds of projects they are.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think it's a good place that if someone wants to, follow up and see what's out there, where they're like, hey, I want to run Kubernetes. Well, I was like, I don't want to do everything. I want to, get a solution. Like, yes, I think it'd be great to have some vendor, link or something like that. But I don't want to, again, broaden the scope of the SIG too much where it just loses focus and kind of just collects links from everywhere.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. All right. So, other guys, any closing questions?
Maybe we could just summarize some of the actions that have come out of this. So it sounds like Zen, you and I can kind of connect with the other SIGs that are somewhat overlappy and qualify some guardrails to direct people in the right areas of the community as we start to define what our main in scope areas are and crystallize that. That's the main one that I see here. I'm not seeing any other big action items jump out to me right now. We should obviously work on the roadmap for Ihor.
We should also categorize what tools we want to highlight or which ones, or the list of where we can what deploys a bare metal cluster or on-prem cluster. Qualify those and keep adding to the list.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the action item? Sorry, I missed that.
to just keep working on the list of tools and qualify which ones are vendor specific and which ones are community open source.
Yeah, that should go into everyone, but it's hard to keep everyone responsible. So, all right, let's think who should curate that list or take care.
Did we determine a permanent meeting time?
Oh yeah, I will send out. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we'll send out the.
Any other actions folks can think of?
Thanks for reminding this. Yeah, I forgot about it.
Cool. Well, hopefully we can get in the habit of having similarly productive meetings that end on time and cover all the agenda items.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I'm surprised it was so crowded and it was very good. So I hope we'll continue this in the future. So thank you, everyone. I'll see you probably in 3 weeks.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.